inverse of an if-then statement or the inverse of a conditional statement. How do we determine the inverse of a conditional statement?
Good day everyone! Welcome to my learning channel, Sir Fox Learning Channel. Today, we will learn Mathematics 8 with Teacher Arlene. At kung bago ka sa channel na ito, huwag mong kalimutang mag-subscribe at i-hit ang notification bell all para updated ka sa mga susunod ko pong videos. Happy learning everyone!
Good morning, grade 8 learners. Today, I'm going to present to you the converse, biconditional, inverse, and the contrapositive statements. This is for week 6 and 7 of quarter 2. So, let's start. The converse of an if-then statement or the conditional statement. Okay, how do we determine the converse of the conditional statement? Okay, to determine the converse of the conditional statement, interchange the hypothesis and the conclusion. So remember, if the conditional statement is written in the if-then form, the phrase after the word if is called the hypothesis, and the phrase after the word then is the conclusion. So let's take this example. Okay, in the conditional statement, if it rains, then they cancel school. The converse of that is, if they cancel school, then it rains. So, paano natin nakuha yung converse statement? Ang sabi, you're going to interchange the hypothesis and the conclusion. So here, the hypothesis is it rains in the conditional statement. The conclusion is they cancel school. So to get the converse, you're going to interchange this conclusion and the hypothesis. So the conclusion will become the hypothesis in the converse statement, and the hypothesis in the conditional statement will become the conclusion. Therefore, you have, if they cancel school, then it rains. That is the converse. So you have to take note of this. Sometimes the converse of a statement is not true. Like in this example, no? There might be another reason to cancel school, not just rain. Diba? Bakit? Porque ba umulan? Ka-cancel na yung school? Pwede, pero hindi porket kinancel ang school, umulan. Merong ibang reason, diba? So, the conditional statement is if P, then Q. Remember that P is the hypothesis, Q is the conclusion in your previous discussion with Ma'am Ismail, no? In symbol, we have P, then Q. The converse will be if Q, then P. Yan. Q, then P. So again, remember, P is the hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. So in the converse, we interchange P and Q. So that's it. Let's take example number 2. Okay, the conditional statement is if two angles are complementary, then the sum of their measure is 90. So in this statement, the hypothesis is two angles are complementary. And the conclusion is the sum of their measure is 90 degrees. Okay, we're going to interchange the hypothesis and the conclusion. Pagpapalitin lang po yun, ha? So the converse will become if the sum of the measures of two angles, so take a look at this, the sum of the measures of two angles, you're going to write that after the word if. If the sum of the measure of two angles is 90 degrees, then they are complementary. Okay? So in this example, this time the converse is true. Diba? So, kapag may dalawang angle na ang sum ay 90 degrees, complementary naman talaga yun. Okay, so example number 3. The conditional statement is, if angle A is a right angle, then it measures 90 degrees. So if you're going to get the converse of that, this angle A, or this hypothesis, will become our conclusion, and the conclusion, it measures 90 degrees, will become our hypothesis. So the converse will be, if angle A measures 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Again, this time, the converse is true. Okay, ganun lang po kadaling magsulat ng converse. Papagpalitin lang ang hypothesis at ang conclusion. So, let's go to biconditional statement. So, remember, the converse of a given conditional statement is not always true. Now, what happens if both are true? Okay, sabi dito, a biconditional statement is formed when both conditional and converse statements are true. So how are you going to write it? This can be written by connecting the hypothesis and the conclusion with the phrase if and only if, okay, or IFF. So let's take this example. Conditional statement is, if angle A is a right angle, then it measures 90 degrees. The converse is, if angle A measures 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. So, the conditional statement is true. The converse is also true. Since the conditional statement and the converse are both true, then we can write a biconditional statement. Again, to write it, you're going to connect the hypothesis and the conclusion with the phrase if and only if. So, in this example, the hypothesis is, angle A is a right angle. That's the phrase after the word if. And the conclusion is, it measures 90 degrees. So, in writing biconditional statement, we do not write if and then. So, we will not start with the word if in writing biconditional. Instead, we're going to start it with the hypothesis. Okay? So, and then after writing the hypothesis, you're going to write the phrase if and only if, and then it will follow by the conclusion. So the biconditional statement for this will be, angle A is a right angle. So here it is. Angle A is a right angle. That's our hypothesis. Angle A is a right angle if and only if it measures 90 degrees. It measures 90 degrees. So see, very easy, diba? So let's take example 2. So on the other hand, since biconditional statement can be formed if the converse statement and the conditional are both true, then given the biconditional statement, you can split it into two statements, the conditional and the converse. So let's take this. Given the biconditional statement, two angles are complementary if and only if the sum of their measure is 90 degrees. So, if you see the phrase if and only if, tandaan, ibig sabihin, the statement is biconditional. So, yung unang phrase na makikita nyo, that will be our hypothesis. At yung pagkatapos ng if and only if, siya naman yung conclusion. So, if you already know the hypothesis and the conclusion, then you can write the conditional statement. So, conditional statement, but if P, or if hypothesis, then Q, or conclusion. Okay, so we have the conditional statement if followed by the hypothesis. Okay, if two angles are complementary, then we have this conclusion. The sum of their measure is 90 degrees. Okay, and of course, since we already know the conditional statement, we can write its converse. The converse, this time, again, we're going to interchange this, the hypothesis and the conclusion. So we have if the sum of the measures of two angles is 90 degrees, then they are complementary. Okay? So, remember this, class. Okay? In the conditional statement, we have if P, then Q. Writing the converse, we have if Q, then P. We just interchange P and Q. But in biconditional statement, we write it as P if and only if Q. So in symbols, we write it this way. P if and only if Q. Okay. Next, let's go to inverse of an if-then statement or the inverse of a conditional statement. How do we determine the inverse of a conditional statement? So, sabi dito, to determine the inverse of the conditional statement, take the negation of both hypothesis and the conclusion. So, negation, gagawin lang natin negative yung statement natin. Okay, for example, so in the conditional statement, if it rains, then they cancel school. So, how will you get the negation? If it rains, of course, pagka sinabing negation nun, does not rain. Diba? So, the inverse will be, if it does not rain, then they do not cancel school. So, gagawin mo lang yung kabaliktaran. Kung umulan, nag-cancel ng school. The inverse will be, kung hindi umulan, edi hindi nila ika-cancel ng school. Diba? If it rains, then they cancel school. That's the conditional statement. So, the inverse of that will be, if it does not rain, then they do not cancel school. So, example 2. Given the conditional statement, if a polygon has exactly 4 sides, then it is a quadrilateral. So, how will you write the inverse? We're going to get the negation of the hypothesis and the negation of the conclusion, Okay, the inverse will be, if a polygon does not have exactly 4 sides, then it is not a quadrilateral. No? If a polygon does not have exactly 4 sides, then it does not a quadrilateral. So, inverse, kabaligtaran, in other words, no? So, remember this. In the conditional statement, we have if P, then Q. So, if you're going to get the inverse, it will become, if not P, then not Q. Okay? So, in symbols, we write it this way. Okay? So, let's go to the next. This is the last one, the contrapositive statement. So, what is the contrapositive statement? Or how do we determine the contrapositive of a given conditional statement? To determine the contrapositive of the conditional statement, you just get the inverse of the converse. No? So, the contrapositive is the inverse of the converse. Ibig sabihin, kapag merong conditional statement, kukunin mo muna yung converse. Pag nakuha mo yung converse, kukunin mo yung inverse ng converse. Okay, let's take this example. The conditional statement is, if it rains, then they cancel school. So, that's the conditional statement. So, again, let's recall, earlier we discussed how to determine the converse. The converse is, we will just interchange the hypothesis and the conclusion. So, the converse will be, if they cancel school, then it rains. So, that's the converse, no? So, paano kukunin ng contrapositive? We will get the inverse of the converse. So, don't be confused, ha? Ang inverse, negation ng conditional statement. Negative ng conditional statement, yun ang inverse. Ang contrapositive, siya naman yung negation ng converse o yung kabaligtaran ng converse. So, isa pa, yung inverse statement, a while ago, kabaligtaran ng conditional statement. Ang contrapositive, kabaligtaran naman ng converse o negation niya po. Inverse ng converse. Again, so let's continue. Converse, if they cancel school, then it rains. So how will you get the contrapositive of that? We will negate this, the hypothesis, and negate the conclusion of the converse. If they do not cancel school, if they cancel school, the negation, if they do not cancel school. then the conclusion. The converse, then it rains. So, ang negation nun, then it does not rain. So again, if the converse, if they cancel school, then it rains. The contrapositive will be, if they do not cancel school, then it does not rain. Okay. So take note of the following when you are writing a contrapositive statement. Sabi, the contrapositive statement is not always true. So how will we write the contrapositive? Write first the converse of the statement before writing the contrapositive. In this way, you will not get confused. Okay? So, tandaan, ang contrapositive, inverse ng converse. While the inverse statement is the negation of the conditional statement. Okay, let's go to the next example. Example 2. Conditional statement. If a polygon has exactly 4 sides, then it is a quadrilateral. So the converse of this will be, we will just interchange the hypothesis and the conclusion. Okay? Converse is, if a polygon is a quadrilateral, then it has exactly 4 sides. So after getting the converse, you may now get the contrapositive. Tandaan, yung contrapositive, ang basis natin ay yung converse. So hindi ka kukuha ng contrapositive kung hindi mo pa nakukuha ang converse. Okay? Prerequisite. Prerequisite, ibig sabihin mahalaga na kukunin mo na yung converse bago mo kunin ang contrapositive. Okay, so the contrapositive will be, again, the negation of the converse. Okay, o ibig sabihin negation, negative. Okay, contrapositive. If a polygon is not a quadrilateral, sorry for this. If a polygon is not a quadrilateral, then it does not have exactly 4 sides. Okay. So, let's go to example 3. Let's take this. The conditional statement is, if angle A is a right angle, then it measures 90 degrees. Okay, the converse will be, if angle A measures 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Okay, so if this is the converse, again, dito lang tayo magpo-focus to get the contrapositive. Okay, get the negation of the converse. If angle A does not measure 90 degrees, then it is not a right angle. Okay, that's how we write contrapositive. Okay, all in all, we have to remember this. Okay, given the conditional statement, we have if P, then Q. So remember this phrase. The inverse will be, if not P, then not Q. Okay, the inverse statement is the negation of the conditional statement. Okay, the converse is, if Q, then P. So you will notice, pinagpalit lang yung P at yung Q. Interchange. So the converse, to get the converse, you will just interchange P and Q, or the hypothesis and the conclusion. Oh, and the contrapositive will be the negation of the converse. If not Q, then not P. And of course, by conditional, we write this, if both conditional and converse statement are true. We write it this way, P, if and only if Q. Okay, just remember, P is our hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. Okay, thank you very much for watching and for listening. So I hope you learned something. This time you can now work with your week 6 and 7 of quarter 2 module. Thank you very much.